The air was thick with tension, the kind that seeps silently into every corner of a room. And yet, outside, the world saw nothing. They saw a prince, tall, composed, resolute. They saw Meghan Markle, radiant, graceful, untouchable. But behind the carefully curated public images, behind the flashes of cameras and the applause of onlookers, something unimaginable had occurred. Something that had brought Prince Harry, once known for his composure under the harshest scrutiny, to his knees. Tears streamed down his face, shaking him in a way no headline, no scandal, no public battle ever had. What could possibly have reduced a man of courage and determination to this raw, unfiltered state? The answer lies in a moment, a phone call, a diagnosis that would ripple through their lives in ways the world could never predict. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Have you ever received news that changes everything? The kind that stops your heartbeat for just a moment, leaving you suspended between disbelief and dread? That is precisely what happened in the heart of the Sussex household. Meghan, the woman who had captured the hearts of millions, the woman whose life was a delicate dance between public adoration and private vulnerability, had received a medical diagnosis that no one could have anticipated. And the impact was immediate, seismic, and utterly devastating. The story begins not in the glare of cameras, but in a quiet, intimate moment. It was a late evening, the kind where the world outside falls asleep while the mind races with thoughts too heavy to bear. Harry and Meghan sat across from each other, a silence stretching long and fragile, interrupted only by the ticking of a clock and the faint hum of the city beyond their walls. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, Meghan spoke the words that would change the course of their lives. Harry's initial reaction was a mixture of shock and disbelief. His hands shook, his breath caught in his chest. For someone constantly under the public eye, accustomed to managing pressure with grace and diplomacy, this was different. This was personal. This was intimate. And it struck at the very core of his being. As Meghan explained her diagnosis, Harry felt an overwhelming sense of helplessness. What could he say? What could he do? His usual strategies. Calm composure, measured responses, protective humor, failed him entirely. He was stripped bare, confronting a reality he had never imagined facing. But what was it about this diagnosis that had such a profound effect? It wasn't just the medical implications, though they were serious. It wasn't just the potential impact on their family, their children, or their future plans, though those considerations weighed heavily. It was the emotional gravity. The undeniable realization that life, no matter how privileged or shielded, could still deliver blows that leave you vulnerable, exposed, and completely uncertain. Harry's tears were not just about fear. They were about love, loyalty, and the raw terror of facing the unknown alongside the person he cherished most in the world. For those who have followed Harry and Meghan's journey, it might be tempting to view this through the lens of celebrity drama. But this moment transcends headlines, gossip columns, and Twitter commentary. It is a human story, a story of fragility and resilience, a story about facing unimaginable news and confronting the question, how do you continue when everything you thought was certain suddenly isn't? Even before the diagnosis, their lives had been under scrutiny. Every decision, every glance, every public appearance dissected and debated. And now, with this news, the stakes had multiplied exponentially. Privacy, already a fragile luxury, became almost non-existent. Conversations that should have remained intimate were at risk of leaking into a world eager for scandal. The couple found themselves in a position few could comprehend, trying to navigate personal pain while simultaneously managing public perception. Harry's emotions were not contained to tears alone. Anger, confusion, guilt, all of these surged within him. Guilt, particularly, gnawed at his core. Could he have prevented this? Should he have seen signs earlier? Was there something he should have done differently? These questions, though unanswerable, haunted him relentlessly. Meghan, for her part, remained stoic yet fragile, attempting to maintain a semblance of normalcy while internally processing the gravity of her condition. Their shared glances spoke volumes. Words were insufficient to capture the depth of what they were experiencing. Imagine, for a moment, sitting in Harry's shoes. You are someone who has faced wars of every kind. Public scrutiny, media persecution, family tension, political pressure. Yet nothing in your life had prepared you for this. Nothing could. And there, in the quiet of their home, stripped of audience, of applause, of adulation, he faced one of the most human experiences possible, watching someone you love confront a terrifying reality and realizing that nothing you have ever done in your life can fix it for them. And yet, even in the midst of this despair, a certain urgency took hold. Decisions had to be made. Conversations had to occur. Family members had to be informed, advisors consulted, and plans reconsidered. But how do you make rational decisions in the middle of an emotional storm? How do you maintain clarity when fear and love are entwined so tightly that even the simplest thoughts feel impossible to articulate? These were the questions that dominated their days and nights, questions that had no easy answers, questions that the world outside their walls could never hope to understand fully. Public life, of course, waited for no one. The media continued its relentless scrutiny, oblivious to the private struggles unfolding behind palace doors. Social media commentary, tabloid speculation, and the omnipresent lens of public opinion threatened to overwhelm them. Every interaction, every movement risked misinterpretation. Yet Harry and Meghan pressed on, navigating the treacherous waters of public life while confronting their private crisis. A balancing act of extraordinary difficulty, made all the more poignant by the stark contrast between their public composure and private vulnerability. The intensity of their experience was magnified by the presence of their children. How do you shield young minds from fear and uncertainty? How do you maintain a sense of normalcy when the ground beneath you feels anything but stable? For Harry and Meghan, these questions were not hypothetical. They were daily realities. Each decision weighted with the future well-being of their family. The stakes were not abstract. They were immediate, tangible, and emotionally charged. Yet even in despair, moments of connection and tenderness appeared. Harry's tears were followed by quiet embraces, whispered reassurances, and shared silences that spoke more than words ever could. Meghan's courage, even in the face of fear, inspired a resilience in Harry that few outside their private world could witness. These were fleeting, fragile moments, yet they provided glimpses of hope amidst the storm, a reminder that even in the darkest chapters, love and human connection endure. And still, questions loomed. How would the diagnosis affect their public roles, their personal dreams, their very sense of identity? Would it redefine their relationship with the royal family, with the media, with the world? These were questions without immediate answers, and the uncertainty only added weight to an already overwhelming situation. Every day became a tightrope walk between fear and hope, between despair and determination. For the audience watching from afar, the story raises a profound point. No matter who we are, no matter how powerful or privileged, life can present challenges that leave us completely unprepared. It is in these moments that human vulnerability becomes both most apparent and most relatable. Harry, the prince, the global figure, was suddenly not a symbol of resilience, but a man grappling with the raw, universal fear of loss. And Meghan, the figure of elegance and strength, revealed that even those who appear untouchable are susceptible to the fragility of life. As the evening drew to a close, the silence returned, heavier than before. But it was no longer merely a quiet. It was a pregnant pause, a moment teetering on the edge of revelation. The next steps, the decisions, the consequences, all waited in the shadows, ready to unfold in ways that would shock the world. Harry's tears were not the end. They were the beginning of a journey that would test every fiber of his being and reshape the narrative of one of the most scrutinized couples in modern history. And yet, as they sat there, holding on to each other in the fragile embrace of shared fear and love, one question hung over them. One question that demanded an answer. One question that would set the stage for everything to come. What happens when the world expects you to be strong, but strength alone cannot shield you from the unbearable? But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It all started on a day that seemed ordinary, almost mundane. The sun rose over the Sussex estate, spilling golden light across the manicured gardens, and the world outside continued its endless rhythm, oblivious to the quiet tension building inside. To an outsider, it would have seemed like any other morning. Birds chirped, the scent of freshly brewed coffee lingered in the air, and the soft murmur of a news broadcast filled the background. But for Harry and Meghan, there was an undercurrent, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the atmosphere that hinted something monumental was on the horizon. Harry had risen early, as he often did, to take a solitary walk through the sprawling grounds. The crunch of gravel under his feet, the cool breeze against his face, the distant laughter of children playing. It was all familiar, grounding. Yet his mind was anything but calm. He found himself reflecting on the past months, the challenges they had faced, the battles fought in the court of public opinion, the endless scrutiny that had become a constant companion. Each victory, each moment of peace, had been hard-won, but now there was an unease he couldn't shake, a sense that the fragile equilibrium they had managed to maintain was about to be disrupted. Meghan, meanwhile, moved through the house with her usual grace, attending to her morning routines, speaking softly with the children, preparing for the day. On the surface, everything appeared normal. Smiles exchanged, playful banter, the kind of warmth that could fool anyone who only saw them from a distance. But beneath that veneer, there was an invisible tension, a sense of anticipation that neither could name. Small gestures, Harry lingering a little too long at the breakfast table, Meghan pausing mid-step, lost in thought, hinted at the storm quietly gathering on the horizon. This is often the way with life's most pivotal moments. They arrive without fanfare, slipping into ordinary days with quiet inevitability, and it is only in retrospect that the signs become clear. That morning, neither of them could have predicted the phone call that would soon shatter their fragile calm. Yet in hindsight, every minor detail, the way the sunlight caught the window, the hushed tones of a conversation in the next room, the fleeting look of concern in Harry's eyes, seemed to foreshadow the upheaval to come. The day unfolded in a rhythm that belied the tension. Calls were made, emails answered, schedules checked and adjusted. The couple moved through their responsibilities with practiced efficiency, the kind that comes from years of managing pressure and maintaining appearances. And yet, there was a quiet anxiety, a tautness to their movements, that suggested something unspoken hung between them. They were actors in a drama that had yet to fully reveal its script, performers aware that the next scene would demand every ounce of emotional endurance they could muster. Harry's thoughts wandered to the past, to the time before the public gaze had become so relentless. He remembered moments of unguarded laughter, private jokes, quiet evenings where the world outside could not intrude. Those moments felt distant now, almost dreamlike, a stark contrast to the intensity of their current lives. And yet, those memories were a source of strength, reminders of the bond that had brought them together, a bond that would soon be tested in ways neither could imagine. The morning passed in a blur of routine and anticipation, and then, without warning, it came, the call. It was brief, almost perfunctory, yet every word carried weight. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, but the gravity of the message was unmistakable. Meghan's expression shifted subtly, her hands tightening around the phone, her gaze dropping to the floor. Harry, sensing the change instantly, stepped closer, instinctively reaching out to offer support. But even before she could speak, the room seemed to grow heavier, the air thick with unspoken dread. What followed was a conversation that would alter the trajectory of their lives. Meghan's words were careful, measured, yet the underlying truth was undeniable. The diagnosis. A phrase that seemed almost too clinical, too detached for the emotional reality it carried, was delivered with a clarity that left no room for misunderstanding. And in that moment, the calm of the morning dissolved entirely, replaced by a tidal wave of emotion that neither had anticipated. Harry's initial reaction was visceral. His heart pounded, a rapid staccato that echoed in his ears. His breath caught, and a cold wave of fear washed over him. He wanted to speak, to offer comfort, to shield Meghan from the implications of the words he had just heard. But the enormity of the situation rendered him almost speechless, leaving him grasping for phrases that could not capture the depth of his concern. It was a rare moment of vulnerability, a crack in the armor of composure that he had cultivated over a lifetime of public scrutiny and private challenges. Meghan, meanwhile, faced her own emotional tumult. The diagnosis was frightening, yes, but there was also a profound sense of responsibility to herself, to Harry, to their family. She had to process the news, understand its implications, and prepare for the decisions that lay ahead. Yet, even in her fear, there was courage, a steadfast determination to confront the reality before her rather than hide from it. Her poise, though shaken, remained a guiding force for Harry, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, resilience can emerge. As the morning stretched into afternoon, the couple navigated the delicate balance between shock and action. Calls were made to trusted advisors, plans for medical consultations were discussed, and strategies for managing both private and public aspects of the situation began to take shape. Every decision carried weight. Every word spoken had the potential to influence outcomes far beyond their immediate understanding. It was a dance of precision and care, a testament to their strength and commitment to each other in the face of overwhelming uncertainty. And yet, for all their preparation and careful planning, some aspects of life cannot be anticipated. The emotional gravity of the diagnosis, the sudden intrusion of fear and doubt, created a ripple effect that touched every corner of their existence. Daily routines were disrupted, conversations became more cautious, and even moments of levity carried an undertone of urgency. It was as if the world itself had shifted, the familiar contours of their lives replaced by an uncertain landscape where every step required careful navigation. Throughout the day, Harry's mind repeatedly returned to a single question: how do you protect someone you love from the storm, when the storm itself is invisible and inevitable? The answer was elusive, a combination of instinct, empathy, and an unwavering commitment to stand by Meghan no matter what came next. He realized that strength was not always about control or composure. Sometimes it was about presence, about being willing to face the unknown alongside the person you care for most. By the evening, the initial shock had begun to settle into a complex mix of emotions: fear, determination, grief, and hope. The calm of the morning had given way to the quiet intensity of a day forever marked by revelation. And as Harry and Meghan sat together in the fading light, holding on to each other for comfort, a new awareness began to emerge. The storm was coming, and they would face it together. Yet, even as they clung to each other, the horizon remained uncertain. Every decision, every conversation, every action from this point forward would carry consequences that neither could fully predict. Friends, family, and advisors would weigh in, media scrutiny would intensify, and the public eye, relentless and unyielding, would watch their every move. The calm that had defined the morning was gone, replaced by a tension that was as palpable as it was inescapable. But what came next would test everything they thought they knew about love, resilience, and the human spirit, and no one saw it coming. The phone rang at an unexpected hour, piercing the quiet of their home with an urgency that felt almost ceremonial. Harry, who had been pacing the study, the weight of the morning still pressing on his shoulders, froze mid-step. The ring was insistent in a way that demanded attention, and when Meghan picked it up, there was a subtle shift in her expression, a tightening around her eyes, a brief pause in her voice that spoke volumes before she even uttered a word. For those who have only ever seen Harry and Meghan in the spotlight, the idea that they could be caught completely off guard may seem impossible. They are, after all, individuals who have lived their lives under the most intense scrutiny imaginable. But no amount of preparation, no amount of foresight, could have readied them for this moment. This call, this message, would reverberate through their lives in ways both intimate and public, shaking the very foundation of the world they had carefully constructed. Harry, Meghan's voice was calm, almost eerily so, though the tremor beneath it betrayed her inner turmoil. He moved closer, instinctively, as though proximity alone could shield him from the gravity of her words. Her hand trembled slightly as she held the phone, her gaze fixed on the floor, avoiding his eyes. And then, in the quietest whisper, she spoke the words that would shatter the fragile equilibrium of their day. "It's serious." Harry's heart skipped, then raced. Serious. A simple word, but laden with implications that made his chest tighten with fear. He wanted to ask questions, to demand details, to make sense of what he was hearing. But even before he could frame the first sentence, Meghan continued, her voice steady yet heavy with unspoken weight. The diagnosis. It's something we need to face, together. The room seemed to constrict around him, the walls closing in as the words settled like a stone in his chest. A diagnosis, one word that held multitudes. Harry's mind flashed to every conceivable scenario. The worst possibilities, the frightening probabilities, the medical terms he barely understood but felt instinctively were serious. And yet, beyond the clinical, the factual, lay the emotional truth. The woman he loved, his partner, his anchor in a world of chaos, was suddenly vulnerable in a way that transcended the ordinary. He reached out, taking her hand in his, the simple physical connection grounding them both in a moment that otherwise threatened to spiral uncontrollably. "We'll get through this," he whispered, though even as he spoke, the words felt both reassuring and insufficient. How do you comfort someone when the shadow of mortality and uncertainty looms so large? How do you stay composed when the fear of losing the person you love most grips you so completely? Harry's mind raced, and yet, in the midst of panic, there was a clarity. He would not leave her, not for a second. Meghan, for her part, fought to maintain her composure. The diagnosis was terrifying, yes, but she had faced challenges before, challenges that demanded both courage and strategy. She knew that panic, while understandable, would not serve them now. They needed a plan, a path forward. But even as she considered logistics, medical appointments, consultations with specialists, discussions with family, the emotional weight pressed in, a constant reminder that no preparation could shield them from fear, from grief, from the raw, unfiltered reality of the moment. Harry's mind turned over every possibility, every contingency. The news felt surreal, almost cinematic, as though he were trapped in a scene scripted by some cruel writer with a penchant for dramatic irony. They had faced scrutiny, criticism, and the relentless gaze of the public, yet nothing had prepared him for this intimate, unmediated confrontation with mortality and uncertainty. The fear was visceral, coiling tightly around his chest, making each breath a conscious effort. And yet, even in the midst of fear, there were flickers of resolve. Harry's gaze met Meghan's, and in that silent exchange, there was a recognition. They were in this together. No amount of public opinion, no waves of media speculation, no whisperings of scandal could separate them. Their bond, forged through years of shared trials and triumphs, was suddenly both their shield and their compass. They would face this diagnosis not as individuals, but as partners, as a family unit, as a team against the unknown. The hours that followed were a whirlwind. Calls were made to doctors, appointments were scheduled, and confidential discussions began with advisors who had long guided them through crises of varying magnitude. Every interaction was laced with urgency, yet overlaid with the heavy emotional undertone of a diagnosis that could not be ignored. The couple navigated this delicate terrain with the poise and decisiveness honed through years of public life, even as the private reality of fear and uncertainty pressed in from all sides. Harry, in particular, felt the weight of responsibility keenly. It was not simply concern for Meghan's health. It was the realization that every decision he made, every word he spoke, would ripple outwards, affecting family dynamics, public perception, and their own mental and emotional equilibrium. The stakes were immense, and yet, in that gravity, he found clarity. His role was not to shield Meghan from the reality. He could not do that. But to stand beside her, unflinching, unwavering, a presence of strength amidst the storm. There were moments of stark vulnerability. Tears, unbidden and uncontrolled, traced Harry's face, a rare glimpse into the depth of his emotional landscape. Meghan, sensing his fear, responded not with judgment or reassurance alone, but with a steady presence that spoke volumes. Her courage, even in the face of profound personal risk, anchored him, and in turn, he found the strength to hold on to hope. The dynamic between them shifted subtly, a delicate interplay of mutual reliance and unspoken devotion. The diagnosis also demanded difficult conversations with the children, conversations that required careful framing to protect innocence without shrouding truth. Harry and Meghan navigated these exchanges with a tenderness and honesty that belied the pressure they themselves were under. Every word was measured, every tone considered, every gesture intentional. They sought to convey safety, love, and resilience, even as the world outside waited, poised to interpret every nuance with scrutiny. By evening, the initial shock had begun to solidify into a mixture of apprehension and determination. Plans were drafted, strategies considered, and private discussions held to anticipate next steps. But the emotional undertow remained, a constant reminder that despite preparation and resolve, some realities could not be softened or mediated. This diagnosis was more than a medical fact. It was a catalyst for emotional confrontation, a challenge to their relationship, and a test of their resilience both individually and collectively. Harry, in particular, wrestled with a spectrum of emotions: fear, anger, guilt, and deep, abiding love. Could he have prevented this? Was there a sign he missed, a symptom overlooked? These questions circled relentlessly in his mind, unanswerable yet impossible to silence. And yet, in confronting them, he also recognized a critical truth. The only path forward was together, with transparency, courage, and an unwavering commitment to face the unknown as a unified front. As the night deepened, a fragile quiet settled over the Sussex household. The children slept, the world outside continued its oblivious rhythm, and within the walls, Harry and Meghan held each other in a silence that was both comforting and charged with anticipation. They had faced the initial shock, but the reality of living with this diagnosis, the day-to-day implications, the medical challenges, the emotional toll, was only beginning to unfold. And while they found solace in each other, the outside world was not idle. Media speculation, family concern, and public scrutiny waited, like predators circling a storm-racked shore. Every move, every glance, every word had the potential to be interpreted, dissected, and sensationalized. The diagnosis was private, intimate, and devastating, and yet, there was no escaping the inevitability that their lives, once again, would become the subject of global fascination and debate. But what came next would not only test their personal resilience, it would ignite a series of events, decisions, and confrontations that would challenge everything they thought they knew about trust, loyalty, and the cost of love in the public eye. And no one could have predicted how far-reaching the consequences would be. The moment hit Harry with the force of a tidal wave, sudden, overwhelming, and merciless. He had been trained, in a sense, to endure pressure. He had faced scrutiny that would crumble the unprepared, endured betrayals that cut to the bone, and navigated media storms that left even the most seasoned public figures rattled. Yet nothing in his life had prepared him for the raw, unfiltered emotional weight of seeing Meghan. The woman who had become the center of his world, facing a diagnosis that threatened everything they had built together. It began in the quiet of their sitting room. Meghan had just finished a call with her doctor, the information shared carefully, clinically, with a precision meant to inform, not frighten. But to Harry, the words hung in the air like storm clouds, heavy and oppressive. He sat there, staring at her, struggling to reconcile the woman before him. The confident, poised, and resilient partner he knew, with the vulnerable, frightened human being he now saw. It was as if two realities existed simultaneously, one he had always known and cherished, and another, harsh and unrelenting, that demanded he confront fear in its purest form. He felt the tension coiling in his chest first, a tightness that made every breath deliberate, measured, almost painful. Then came the shakiness in his hands, the involuntary tremor that no public appearance, no carefully rehearsed speech, had ever elicited. His throat constricted, swallowing words before they could emerge. And finally, the tears came, slowly at first, then faster, tracing paths down his face that neither pride nor habit could hide. He had cried before, yes, in private, in moments of frustration or grief, but never like this. Never with the weight of fear for another human being pressing down so completely. Meghan reached for him instinctively. Her hands rested on his shoulders, her touch grounding him in a way that nothing else could. She whispered reassurances, though she knew words could only do so much. Her own emotional reserve had been tested moments before, yet she had found the strength to be the anchor for both of them. And in that quiet exchange, Harry realized something essential. Strength was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to confront it alongside the one you love. His mind raced. Could he have seen signs earlier? Could he have done something differently? Guilt gnawed at him relentlessly. Every decision he had made, every moment he had not spent scrutinizing her health, felt like a potential misstep, a failure of protection. And yet, he knew deep down that blame was pointless in the face of reality. This was life, messy, unpredictable, and often cruel. And the only choice now was to face it together, with courage and vulnerability intertwined. The collapse was not just emotional, it was physical. Harry's body shook with the intensity of his grief. Each sob a release of tension built up over years of repression, of public composure, of battles fought both seen and unseen. He pressed his forehead to his hands, closed his eyes, and let the tears flow freely. In that moment, he was no longer a prince, no longer a public figure, no longer a man expected to carry the weight of expectation with unwavering poise. He was simply human, raw, and exposed. Yet even in this breakdown, there were sparks of clarity. In the midst of terror and grief, Harry understood that his role had shifted. No longer could he shield himself from emotion, nor could he attempt to armor Meghan from hers. Their situation demanded authenticity, presence, and a shared confrontation with fear. It was a lesson in vulnerability, one that only comes when the stakes are at their highest and the consequences of inaction are too great to ignore. Meghan, observing him, responded with patience and compassion. She did not scold him for his tears, nor did she attempt to suppress them. Instead, she allowed him to exist fully in his moment of collapse, reinforcing through quiet support that they were facing this together. Her strength was not in denial of fear, but in its acknowledgement and acceptance, a lesson Harry absorbed with the intensity of someone confronting a previously unimaginable reality. As the day wore on, Harry's emotional collapse manifested in other ways as well. He found it difficult to focus, to engage in routine tasks, to maintain the semblance of normalcy for their children. Every sound, every unexpected noise, sent his thoughts spiraling back to the diagnosis, to the uncertainty that now defined their lives. Meals went uneaten, conversations were fragmented, and sleep became elusive, punctuated by restless moments and vivid dreams of worst-case scenarios. Friends and close advisors noticed the change immediately. Those who had witnessed Harry's public composure over the years recognized that this was different. It was not merely stress or frustration. It was profound, personal anguish, a raw confrontation with vulnerability. Calls of support came, each well-intentioned, yet none able to fully penetrate the emotional reality of the moment. Harry was grappling with something that could not be resolved with advice, with solutions, with strategy. This required endurance, patience, and an extraordinary capacity for empathy, for himself and for Meghan. The media, of course, remained oblivious to the private storm raging within their walls. Outside, life carried on as usual, with headlines, speculation, and rumors circling relentlessly. But inside, Harry's world had contracted to the immediate, to the personal, to the fragile human bond between him and Meghan. The collapse, as debilitating as it was, underscored a profound truth. No amount of fame, privilege, or experience could immunize a person from the raw, unfiltered impact of fear for someone you love. Harry's emotional state also triggered reflections on the past, on moments where he had managed public scrutiny with skill and precision. The contrast was jarring. He realized that while he could navigate scandals, misrepresentations, and political tension, this intimate confrontation with potential loss was a battle for which no training could suffice. It was personal, existential, and unrelentingly real. By evening, Harry's tears had subsided somewhat, leaving behind a residue of exhaustion and a profound sense of awareness. He recognized the necessity of action, of presence, of deliberate choice. He would need to be more than a partner. He would need to be a pillar of support, a steadying influence, and a witness to Meghan's courage in facing the uncertain road ahead. And yet, even as he resolved to be that support, He could not shake the haunting knowledge that the path forward would be fraught with challenges, both private and public. The night was quiet, punctuated only by the distant sounds of the estate and the occasional murmur from the children's rooms. Harry sat beside Meghan, holding her hand, feeling the weight of the day's revelations settle like a heavy fog over their lives. The emotional collapse, intense and draining as it had been, had also forged a deeper connection between them, a shared understanding that life, in its most unpredictable moments, demands both vulnerability and courage. And yet, the collapse was only the beginning. The diagnosis, the fear, the raw confrontation with vulnerability, these were the opening chapters of a story that would test every aspect of their relationship. The world outside, relentless and unforgiving, awaited the unfolding narrative, unaware that the most profound struggles often occur behind closed doors, away from the prying eyes of spectators. But what came next would push Harry beyond the breaking point, forcing him to confront not only fear and grief, but betrayal, scrutiny, and choices that would define the trajectory of their lives, and no one could have anticipated the magnitude of what was about to unfold. The room was quiet, almost unbearably so. After Harry's emotional collapse, the heavy silence hung like a thick curtain, pressing down on them with an intensity that made each breath deliberate and heavy. He sat on the edge of the sofa, head in his hands, the raw aftermath of his breakdown leaving him both drained and hyper-aware. Meghan, sitting beside him, watched carefully, her own emotions tempered by the need to stay grounded. The diagnosis was no longer just news. It was a presence, a weight that colored every glance, every movement, every breath in the room. Harry had seen fear before, yes. He had witnessed uncertainty in war zones, in his own personal trials, in moments of public scrutiny that threatened to overwhelm. But the fear Meghan carried now was different, personal, intimate, and unshielded from the world. It was a fear that demanded honesty, courage, and a level of vulnerability few could ever witness. And that is precisely what Meghan was about to give. After a moment, she turned to Harry, her gaze firm yet tender, and spoke. Her voice, calm and measured, carried a gravity that immediately drew his attention. "Harry, there's something I need to tell you," she said. The words seemed simple, almost casual, but Harry knew from the tone, the weight behind them, that this was no ordinary confession. His pulse quickened. Every instinct in his body, protector, partner, and confidant, heightened in anticipation. The confession that followed was layered, nuanced, and shocking in its depth. Meghan shared aspects of her condition, details that went beyond the clinical diagnosis to reveal the emotional, psychological, and personal toll it had taken on her. She spoke of fear, of moments of uncertainty, of nights spent awake wrestling with questions she could not yet answer. She revealed vulnerabilities that no one had seen before, even Harry, someone who had stood by her side through so much. Her courage was evident not in the words themselves, but in the act of speaking them aloud, of laying herself bare in front of the person she trusted most in the world. Harry listened, utterly still. The words sank in slowly, each one a small dagger, yet also a key unlocking deeper understanding. There was pain, yes, but also clarity. Meghan was not asking for pity. She was asking for partnership, for presence, for the shared courage to face the unknown together. And as he absorbed the depth of her vulnerability, a new wave of emotion washed over him. Not the panic of the initial diagnosis, but a mixture of awe, love, and renewed determination. The confession also included aspects of decisions she had been contemplating, medical, personal, and even professional. Meghan spoke of treatments, of timelines, of considerations for their family, and of how she wished to navigate public perception without compromising their privacy. Every word was measured, thoughtful, and intentional, revealing a strategic mind that balanced vulnerability with a pragmatic approach to an impossible situation. Harry realized, perhaps more fully than ever, that Meghan's strength was multifaceted, emotional, intellectual, and moral. Yet, the most shocking element of the confession was not the details of the diagnosis, nor the intricacies of planning and preparation. It was the emotional honesty. Meghan admitted fears she had never vocalized before. fears about leaving Harry, fears about the impact on their children, fears about losing a sense of normalcy in a life that had already been anything but ordinary. She spoke of moments when despair threatened to overtake hope, and of the constant battle to maintain equilibrium in the face of uncertainty. For Harry, the confession was transformative. His own collapse, raw and unrelenting, had been a response to fear for Meghan, but her words reframed the situation entirely. He realized that his tears were not solely about the diagnosis. They were about the depth of their connection, about the trust and vulnerability required to share such a heavy burden. He recognized that strength was not measured by the absence of fear, but by the willingness to confront it openly, with honesty and courage, alongside the person you love most. Meghan's honesty also created a turning point in their dynamic. For the first time in the day, there was a sense of equilibrium, a fragile, tentative balance where both of them could acknowledge the reality of the diagnosis without being consumed by it. They spoke in hushed tones, exchanging thoughts, fears, and plans, navigating the emotional landscape with a careful, deliberate rhythm. Every glance, every touch, every shared silence reinforced the bond that had carried them through so many trials. Yet even as the confession brought clarity, it also introduced new complexities. Decisions had to be made, timelines considered, and family informed. Each step carried implications not only for their private lives, but for their public roles, for their children's sense of security, and for the way the world would perceive them. The stakes were enormous, and the pressure was unrelenting. Meghan's courage in speaking the truth illuminated the path forward, but it also underscored the enormity of what lay ahead. Harry, for his part, responded with a mixture of awe and determination. He held Meghan's hand, spoke words of reassurance, and allowed himself to be vulnerable in return. For the first time, the fear that had gripped him since the initial diagnosis began to transform into a sense of purpose. He realized that the way forward required partnership, empathy, and the willingness to face unknown challenges head-on. It was not about control or certainty. It was about presence, love, and unwavering commitment. The conversation stretched for hours, touching on medical options, family considerations, and emotional well-being. It was exhaustive, both physically and emotionally, yet it was necessary. In those hours, Harry and Meghan were forced to confront realities they had never faced, to acknowledge fears that had lain dormant, and to find strength in shared vulnerability. It was a crucible, a test of resilience and trust that would define the trajectory of their relationship for years to come. As night fell, a quiet settled over the house. The children slept, unaware of the emotional storm that had unfolded in the hours prior. Harry and Meghan sat together, holding hands, reflecting on the day's revelations. The confession, raw and courageous, had shifted the landscape. Fears still lingered, yes, but it was now tempered by clarity, strategy, and a renewed sense of unity. They were no longer navigating uncertainty in isolation. They were partners, facing the storm together. And yet, even as they found comfort in each other, an unspoken tension remained. The world outside, relentless in its curiosity and scrutiny, waited. Family dynamics, media speculation, and public perception all loomed on the horizon. Every choice they made, every word they spoke, had the potential to amplify or complicate the situation. Meghan's confession had created a new foundation of honesty and courage, but it also raised questions that demanded answers, questions about trust, resilience, and the capacity to face a challenge that few could fully comprehend. And while the night brought temporary solace, it was only a prelude. The confession, brave and unflinching as it was, set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything Harry believed about protection, loyalty, and love. There would be confrontations, revelations, and tests of faith that neither could anticipate. And as they sat together in the fading light, the unspoken understanding hung between them. The journey had only just begun, and the next chapters would push them to the limits of endurance, emotion, and human resilience. But what came next would shock Harry, test Meghan's resolve, and draw the eyes of the world into a story more intense, more personal, and more heart-wrenching than anyone could imagine, and no one was prepared for what would unfold. The walls of the Sussex estate had always offered a semblance of privacy, a buffer between the relentless glare of the world and the intimate moments within. But even the most fortified spaces cannot contain the ripple effects of life-altering news. The diagnosis, though initially shared quietly between Harry and Meghan, could not remain contained for long. Family had to be informed. And in the royal sphere, family is never simple. The first calls were deliberate, measured, and fraught with tension. Harry reached for the phone. Each number dialed a test of courage. It was one thing to process the news privately. It was another to reveal it to those whose reactions could not only affect their personal lives, but also reverberate across the media and public perception. The moment the words left his lips, the gravity of the situation multiplied. It wasn't just a diagnosis. It was a seismic event capable of shaking the foundations of familial relationships. Prince Charles was the first to hear. Harry had rehearsed the conversation in his mind countless times, yet no preparation could soften the impact of a father hearing that his daughter-in-law, his child's mother, faced a serious health concern. The voice on the other end was calm, almost formal, but Harry could hear the underlying tension. Charles asked questions, clinical, measured, and sometimes painfully direct. Harry answered as best he could, balancing honesty with the need to shield details from unnecessary exposure. He knew the conversation would be dissected, remembered, and retold, but in that moment, it was just father and son navigating a shared fear. Charles's reaction was layered. Beneath the calm tone, there was worry, a sense of helplessness, and an attempt to offer reassurance. Yet Harry detected subtle judgments, not in malice, but in the instinctive patterns of family dynamics. Advice flowed, some practical, some tinged with the weight of expectation. And while Harry appreciated the guidance, he knew that Meghan's voice and choices needed to remain central. This was not a situation to be managed solely by others, no matter how well-intentioned their concern might be. Next came calls to William, the brother with whom Harry shared a complex history of rivalry, support, and unspoken tension. This conversation was different. The diagnosis, in Harry's mind, would test not only familial bonds but also decades of accumulated emotional nuance. He braced himself for reactions filtered through public perception, media awareness, and the unspoken pressure of lineage and tradition. When he finally spoke, William's tone was measured, polite, yet tinged with concern and, Harry sensed, disbelief. Questions arose, probing yet careful, reflecting both a desire to understand and the subtle dynamics of a relationship shaped by shared history and expectation. Meghan's family, though not bound by royalty, also played a crucial role. Calls to her closest relatives were layered with emotion, disbelief, concern, and a mixture of protective instinct and practical questioning. Each conversation required diplomacy, empathy, and careful calibration. Meghan's parents and siblings had long been attuned to her public and private life, and yet even they were caught off guard by the gravity of the situation. The words spoken, the reassurances given, and the emotional support offered all carried weight, but they also revealed fault lines in communication, expectation, and understanding. Harry and Meghan were acutely aware that every reaction had layers, immediate concern, long-term implications, and the shadow of public scrutiny. Even a single misstep, a word spoken too sharply, a tone misinterpreted, could escalate into complications both personal and public. They had learned over the years that information in the royal sphere, once released, even inadvertently, never remained private for long. The stakes were immense, and the pressure to maintain composure while conveying urgency was unrelenting. Yet, amid the formal calls and measured conversations, there were moments of raw, unfiltered emotion. Charles, for all his experience, allowed vulnerability to seep through, a quiet admission of fear for the family, of helplessness in the face of illness. William, despite measured tones, revealed flashes of protective instinct and brotherly concern that transcended public expectation. And Meghan's family, though distant geographically, manifested concern in tangible ways, calls, texts, and messages that conveyed not only empathy, but also an urgent desire to be present and support. Navigating these reactions required extraordinary emotional intelligence. Harry found himself balancing reassurance and honesty, understanding and boundary setting. Each interaction demanded attention to subtle cues, the inflection in a voice, the pause before a question, the unspoken implications behind well-meaning advice. In many ways, these conversations were as exhausting as the diagnosis itself, taxing not only the mind but the heart. The couple also had to contend with indirect reactions, those conveyed not through direct conversation, but through observation. Family members who visited or spoke publicly often carried a tension that Harry and Meghan could feel, even when words remained neutral. The couple had to interpret gestures, facial expressions, and subtle shifts in tone, always aware that misreading any cue could compound stress in an already volatile emotional environment. There were also moments of unexpected support and solidarity. Friends and relatives offered guidance, reassurance, and even practical assistance. These allies, carefully chosen, provided a lifeline in the sea of concern and scrutiny. Yet the balance between privacy and support was delicate. Too much information shared, and the situation risked public exposure. Too little, and the couple risked isolation during a critical emotional period. Every decision had consequences, and Harry and Meghan had to navigate them with precision, empathy, and courage. By the evening, a complex tapestry of reactions had emerged. The diagnosis had touched each family member differently, some with immediate fear, others with practical concern, some with detachment, and others with profound emotional investment. Harry and Meghan absorbed these reactions, understanding that family dynamics, no matter how loving, were complicated, layered, and often unpredictable. Each interaction, each word, each emotional ripple shaped the environment in which they would now make critical decisions. Yet, even amid these challenges, one undeniable truth emerged. Family reactions, while varied, reinforced the necessity of unity, communication, and resilience. Harry and Meghan recognized that they could not control every response, nor could they shield themselves entirely from criticism, misunderstanding, or concern. What they could control was their own connection, their mutual support, and their commitment to navigate the storm together. And still, even as the day ended and the immediate waves of reaction subsided, a new tension lingered. The family had heard, the advice had been given, but the decisions, the strategies, and the public implications had only just begun. Every conversation opened the door to further complexity, conflict, misunderstanding, and scrutiny that could erupt at any moment. Harry and Meghan understood, with a clarity born of experience and necessity, that the coming days would test their resilience, their unity, and their ability to maintain both privacy and honesty under the relentless gaze of the world. But what came next would not just challenge their private bonds. It would place them at the epicenter of scrutiny, betrayal, and public fascination in a way that would shock even the most seasoned observers, and no one could have predicted the consequences that were about to unfold. As Harry and Meghan navigated the turbulent waters of family reactions, the outside world continued its relentless rhythm, oblivious to the intimate struggles unfolding behind closed doors. The diagnosis, private and heavy, could not remain contained forever. In the royal orbit, secrecy is a fragile luxury. News travels fast, often distorted by speculation, and in the case of the Sussexes, every development is magnified, scrutinized, and dissected. It began subtly, with vague whispers online, cryptic social media posts, unnamed sources hinting at a family concern or health issue. At first, Harry and Meghan tried to dismiss it, focusing on their immediate reality, the private conversations, the medical planning. But the whispers grew louder, spreading across tabloid websites, forums, and gossip columns. Each iteration twisted facts, created narratives, and fanned the flames of speculation. In a world obsessed with royal drama, the boundary between reality and rumor is easily blurred. The couple quickly realized that controlling the narrative would require vigilance, strategy, and, most importantly, unity. Any misstep, an offhand comment, a public appearance interpreted incorrectly, a body language misread, could be weaponized by the media, spun into headlines that bore little resemblance to the truth. Harry, who had long battled intrusive coverage, knew that this storm would be relentless. Meghan, too, recognized the stakes. The diagnosis was theirs, not the world's, yet the world had a way of inserting itself into every intimate corner. The first major articles appeared in mid-afternoon. They were subtle in tone, but loaded with implication. Terms like concern, strain, and uncertainty peppered the stories, framing the couple's private struggle as a public spectacle. Editors, eager for clicks and controversy, hinted at tension, secrecy, and even marital strain. For those unfamiliar with Harry and Meghan's private lives, the headlines might seem benign, but for the couple, each word carried an emotional weight, a reminder that privacy was fleeting and control illusory. Harry's immediate reaction was a mixture of anger, frustration, and exhaustion. The media had been a constant adversary, but this intrusion into the most personal aspects of life was different. It wasn't merely about public image or reputation. It was about emotional well-being, family integrity, and the ability to navigate a crisis without the glare of judgmental eyes. He spent hours consulting advisors, considering the legal and strategic implications, and drafting statements that would reassure without revealing sensitive details. Every phrase, every nuance, required meticulous care. Meghan, meanwhile, approached the situation with a combination of caution and pragmatism. She understood the media machinery, its appetite for sensationalism, and its willingness to distort reality. Yet, she also recognized the power of authenticity. Strategic communication, carefully framed interviews, and selective disclosure became tools in their arsenal. She focused not on appeasing the critics, but on protecting herself, Harry, and their children, while maintaining transparency where necessary. Social media, however, presented a different challenge. In platforms where rumors spread faster than truth, narratives became unrecognizable almost instantly. Trolls, anonymous commenters, and even well-meaning fans speculated endlessly. Every post was scrutinized, every expression analyzed. For Harry, who had experienced the vitriol of online harassment firsthand, the onslaught was familiar yet still brutal. For Meghan, it was an added layer of stress, a constant reminder that the private implications of the diagnosis were now entangled with public perception. The media storm was relentless. Tabloids printed speculative timelines, discussed potential outcomes, and even questioned the couple's choices in response to the diagnosis. Headlines suggested conflict within the family, insinuated disagreements on treatment decisions, and amplified rumors of personal strain. Harry and Meghan quickly learned that controlling the narrative was not just about statements. It was about managing emotional exposure, reinforcing boundaries, and deciding which battles were worth engaging. Advisors counseled silence in some areas, transparency in others. Every public appearance was scrutinized, a hand on Meghan's back interpreted as tension, a smile at a public event dissected as disingenuous. The couple was forced to navigate a world where ordinary gestures became headlines and private moments became fodder for speculation. Emotional resilience became as crucial as strategic thinking, as every action carried both personal and public weight. Yet amid the relentless scrutiny, there were moments of strategy and subtle victory. Carefully timed announcements, selective interviews with trusted journalists, and deliberate public appearances allowed Harry and Meghan to reclaim some narrative control. They highlighted aspects of their work, their charity initiatives, and their commitment to family, shifting focus from speculation to authenticity. Each calculated move was a small victory, a reminder that even under the microscope, agency could be maintained. The media storm also amplified emotional strain. The couple experienced heightened anxiety, hyper-awareness of every interaction, and a constant sense of being observed. Ordinary conversations, moments of intimacy, and simple gestures became high-stakes calculations. Sleep was interrupted by notifications of news stories, by the anticipation of leaks, and by the emotional labor of maintaining composure. Every day became a tightrope walk between private crisis management and public perception control. Yet, paradoxically, the scrutiny also reinforced their bond. In facing an unrelenting external threat together, Harry and Meghan discovered deeper layers of trust, resilience, and mutual support. They learned to navigate fear, misinformation, and expectation as a united front. Their private struggle became both a test and a testament to their partnership, revealing strengths that might have remained dormant in calmer circumstances. As the storm continued, subtle but persistent questions loomed. How would the media evolve the narrative in the coming weeks? Could family dynamics withstand public intrusion? Would the public ever see the truth behind the headlines, or would perception forever outweigh reality? These questions, heavy with uncertainty, underscored the broader stakes, not just personal, but systemic. The diagnosis, initially a private medical matter, had become a catalyst for navigating a world where image, speculation, and scrutiny often overshadow reality. By nightfall, the Sussex household was both a sanctuary and a battlefield. Harry and Meghan, exhausted yet determined, reflected on the day's events, aware that public scrutiny would continue to escalate. Each strategy, each carefully considered word, was part of a larger effort to protect privacy, maintain dignity, and confront the diagnosis with courage. And while the media storm raged on outside, inside they were forging a new understanding of resilience, both individually and together. But what came next would push Harry and Meghan into the most intense confrontation with public scrutiny they had ever experienced, a reckoning that would challenge trust, ignite controversy, and reveal truths about loyalty, betrayal, and the cost of love under the relentless gaze of the world, and no one could have predicted how far it would go. The Sussex estate had long been a sanctuary for Harry and Meghan, a place where they could create a world that shielded their children from the relentless gaze of the public. But the diagnosis, heavy and unyielding, brought with it an emotional turbulence that was impossible to hide entirely, even from the innocent eyes of their two young children. Archie, with his wide, curious eyes and boundless energy, sensed the tension long before words could explain it. Children, in their remarkable intuition, often perceive the emotional currents around them, even when adults try to mask them. Harry noticed subtle shifts in Archie's behavior: hesitation before entering a room, a pause when speaking, the way he clutched a favorite toy a little tighter than usual. It was clear that the child had absorbed fragments of anxiety, even without understanding the full context. Meghan, ever attuned to the needs of her children, recognized these signs immediately. She knew that honesty had to be balanced with protection. Children deserve truth, yes, but framed in a way that does not overwhelm or burden them. So she approached the subject with care, crafting words that conveyed security and love while acknowledging the changes that were occurring in their lives. "Mommy and Daddy are dealing with something important," she explained gently. "But we are okay, and we are together, and we will always take care of each other."